Alright guys, welcome back, and today I'm checking out another SCP because I think these things are great. Today it's going to be SCP-914 The Clockworks. No idea. Judging from the name, no idea what this is. These SCPs can literally be anything, so let's go ahead and find out what the Clockworks are. Blow my mind, SCP.
Machinery. They all hold their breath as the gigantic mechanism suddenly stops. It's eerily quiet for a moment before a door slides open. The scientists crane their necks to see inside, to see what the result of their great experiment was. These were some of the greatest minds in the SCP Foundation, but nothing could prepare them for what they had created. September 9th, 2008 was an unseasonably frosty day when Dr. Charles Gears, one of the SCP Foundation's most iconic scientists, parked his Honda Civic outside of what seemed like an...
I'm sorry, did they just say his last name was Gears? Okay.
Innocuous government cold storage warehouse. He sipped his coffee and surveyed the building, which he, along with about 100 others in total, knew to be Site 19, Facility 23. Why was Dr. Gears, former director of all Euclid-level containment at Site 19, here today? Because official testing...
Euclid is, like, in the middle, right? Like, safe Euclid... Keter, right? Isn't that what it is?
...was about to begin SCP-914. The Foundation had acquired the machine now known as SCP-914 some time ago, but only after its recent reclassification to 914 had it been relocated to Facility 23. It must have been important because the entirety of the facility was being repurposed for SCP-914 research. They were dealing with an immensely complicated piece of anomalous technology here, and the same question was on everybody's lips. What exactly does this thing do? Dr. Arthur Hackett, the facility director, had requested the cold, clinical assistance of Dr. Gears in providing the answer.
Come on, man. Dr. Gears. You're killing me with this.
Once he'd finished his morning coffee, Dr. Gears headed inside. The facility's security chief, Agent Alan Sedna, had been beefing up security at the building, and at least 2 mobile task force units were already on call in case anything happened. The first day of official testing is always a crapshoot. You might get a nice drink out of it, like with SCP-914. Or you may get an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario. You never really know. All Dr. Gears knew, as he walked up the granite steps to the main entrance, was that he was already feeling exhausted. When you've dealt with anomalous objects and entities for decades on end, the sense of wonder and mystery begins to wear off, only to be replaced with a kind of tedium any office worker knows all too well. Everyone knew that Dr. Gears was devoted to the job, perhaps more than anyone else, but he approached the job with an emotionless effect. You wouldn't know from looking at him if he was thinking about the deadly anomalous creature in the next room, or what he was going to have.
I'm starting to think this is a video about Dr. Gears, because we've not even talked about the machine at all yet.
For lunch that day. The doctor passed through security and was briefed in the break room by Dr. Lucius Veritas, Director of Research at Site 19. He explained that the machine seemed to work in the absence of any power source. Its mechanical structure is similar to machinery from the Industrial Revolution, but it's exceedingly complex for something constructed in that time. Foundation analyses into the structure of the 914 machine have shown it to have as many as 8 million moving parts, and that might even be an incomplete estimate. Dr. Gears wore his trademark blank face as he listened, solemnly nodded, and asked to be shown the anomaly. He was led into Containment Chamber 109B by a pair of guards. According to all current Foundation tests, the machine doesn't appear to pose any active risk of containment breach or danger to the guards, earning it the rare safe designation. As a result...
Okay, so that means it's just a machine. It's not sentient in any way, I think. I mean, I don't know, but if it poses no risk of a containment breach, then it's got to be just a tool, right? Inanimate.
Aside from guards stationed on site, containment procedures for 914 were minimal. Whether this designation would need to be changed after testing was something Dr. Gears would soon find out. SCP-914 was a truly impressive sight to behold. a giant clockwork mechanism taking up around
Okay, see, this is what I want to see. I want to see them talking about the SCP.
18 square feet, with an unfathomably complex combination of screw drives, belts, pulleys, springs, and gears. A less stoic researcher might see the humor in recruiting a Dr. Gears to test such a device.
Well, we can see it has an intake, an outtake, and a settings knob. So, obviously, you put something in one end, and it comes out the other.
But comedy definitely wasn't one of Dr. Gears' specialties. He stared at the machine with a detached fascination, analyzing its vital components at a glance. Gears noted a large mainspring beneath a rudimentary selection panel. The panel is copper, with a large selection knob fixed to an arrow above a series of different options: rough, coarse, 1-to-1, fine, and very fine. There was also a large key below the selection panel, for the purposes of winding up the mainspring and initiating whatever procedure this machine was designed to enact. Next, Dr. Gears noticed two large booths connected to the machine by a pair of equally large copper tubes. The booth on the left labeled intake, and the right labeled output. Incredibly, Dr. Gears was able to immediately deduce the purpose of this machine. It was designed to enact some kind of transformative process on whatever was placed into the intake booth. But what kind of
Well, I mean, you don't need to be a SCP scientist to figure that out. I mean, I just said it has an intake, an outtake, and a knob for settings. Obviously, you put something in one end, it comes out the other, changed.
transformative process? That's exactly what Dr. Gears was here to find out. The experiment was simple. They would gather a series of samples, both inanimate objects and living tissue, and use them to explore the different permutations of the 914 machine's transformative abilities. This initial series of experiments were approved by O5 Command and the site director, and with the 47 researchers present in Facility 23 at his disposal, Dr. Gears commenced his research into SCP-914. To minimize risk, Dr. Gears decided the first test would be a simple kilogram of steel. On his orders, the steel was placed into the intake booth. With the doctor's approval, a junior researcher set the control panel setting to rough and began twisting the mainspring key, at which point the booth's doors closed and a small bell inside chimed. The machine began to rumble. Its 8 million working...
Alright, so judging from the settings, rough, coarse, fine, very fine, and 1-to-1. So, alright guys, here's my guess. Let's start with 1-to-1. Obviously, 1-to-1 is a 1-to-1 ratio. You put something in it, and there should be a 1-to-1 output on the other side. So, I guess you just get the same thing? Does it not change anything if you put it on 1-to-1, or does it just make like minor alterations? And then rough and very fine, if we go to the other extreme, the ends here, the extremes. Rough, very fine. Rough. Does that turn it into like its base components? While very fine improves upon it? Does rough deconstruct it while very fine improves upon it? And 1-to-1 it is no change? That's my initial guess here, guys. Let's see what happens.
Pieces churning into life. It continued like this for around 10 minutes before falling silent, at which point the output booth opened. What had once been a single lump of steel weighing 1 kilogram was now an uneven pile of smaller lumps, with evidence of laser cutting. Dr. Gears made note of the fact that having lasers within such a machine is both anachronistic and anomalous, and that the rough setting appears to messily cleave the object placed within the intake booth into pieces. Dr. Gears...
Okay, so rough doesn't necessarily break it down into something simpler, because it didn't break the steel down into steel's base components, which is what, like iron and carbon or something like that? I don't know, I'm not a metallurgist, but I know steel is an alloy, a composite of more than one thing. So it doesn't break it down into its base components, it simply just breaks it apart into pieces, I guess. Okay. So I was wrong on the rough setting.
Gears also noted that it would be unwise to test any kind of explosive material on the rough setting, unless of course they wanted to destroy the building. The research continued. Dr. Gears used another 1 kilogram lump of steel to test the 1-to-1 feature. This time the result was far more peculiar. The output booth contained the exact same weight in steel screws. This result was sparking even greater connections in Dr. Gears' impressive.
Okay, so it looks like I was wrong on the 1-to-1. It does change the object. So rough did not change the object, it simply split the object into more than one piece. 1-to-1 I had assumed would have taken the steel bar and just spit out another identical steel bar. But instead it made screws out of the steel bar. Interesting. I can't predict it apparently. It took the item, transferred it into a different form, but kept all its mass. So it was technically still a 1-to-1 because it didn't gain or lose anything in this process.
Impressive analytical mind. Firstly, the 1-to-1 feature caused the 914 machine to transform the output into something different from, but similar to, the intake. And while this would require further testing, it appeared that the 914 machine, despite being anomalous, does still follow the laws of physics. Samples passed through the machine conserve their mass and would not be transmuted on an atomic level from one element to another.
Okay.
Next, Dr. Gears pushed another lump of steel through the machine on the fine setting. The result this time was a kilogram of steel carpet tacks. From this, Dr. Gears was able to ascertain that the fine feature improves the samples placed within the intake booth somewhat. However, things got even stranger when Gears performed the same experiment on the very
So fine kind of did improve it. So very fine might in fact improve it. I might be right on at least one of my 3 guesses.
fine setting. The output booth provided several unknown gases and a lump of unknown metal with anomalous qualities. Namely, it was resistant to heat up to 50,000 degrees, impossible to bend or break with any force, and was a perfect conductor of electricity. Dr. Gears suddenly realized his task here may be more interesting than he'd initially imagined. Was that a bit of a smile on his face that one researcher spotted? Surely not. This was the famous unflappable Dr. Gears, after all. The doctor decided to take it up a notch and began to test.
So I'm digging the machine. I like the machine, but I swear every time they say Dr. Gears, I just roll my eyes a little bit. I'm like, come on, man. Really, Dr. Gears?
More complex items in the 914 machine. He removed his own wristwatch and placed it into the input booth before setting the machine to course and letting her rip. Literally, in this case. When the output booth was opened, the watch had been painstakingly disassembled into its component parts with no damage to said parts. Dr. Gears noted the coarse feature as a more mild version of the rough, in the sense that it was able to take an object apart without any kind of fundamental damage.
Okay, cool. So coarse will disassemble something without damaging it. And rough will just will disassemble it and damage it.
He also made note of the fact he'd need to get himself a new watch. Dr. Gears then asked one of the researchers to surrender their cell phone for testing. While none were excited at the prospect of their phone getting eviscerated by a clockwork behemoth, one of the researchers eventually surrendered their BlackBerry Curve.
So, I mean, I think I see where they're going with this, right? Take something like a cell phone, throw it in there, put it on the very fine setting, and you're going to get like a supercomputer or something, right?
To the doctor. He placed it into the intake booth on the 1-to-1 setting, and 10 minutes later, the output booth released a brand new Apple iPhone. Sadly for the researcher who donated his BlackBerry, he wasn't allowed to keep the new device. Naturally, Dr. Gears was interested in trying out the anomalous, very fine setting on a more complex object. Seeing as no other researchers were eager to hand over their personal effects, he took a Colt Python revolver from a member of security and ran that through the machine on very fine. The result was an extremely powerful energy weapon containing gamma radiation, which fired a beam capable of disintegrating anything in its path. While the weapon's power was immense, it was also too dangerous and unstable to be added to the Foundation's armory.
Okay, now we're talking. You put in a Colt revolver. So you put in a handgun that fires solid projectiles, and out of it you got a rifle that fires energy blasts and beams of radiation. Like, wow, okay, that's a huge leap up. So the verifying setting, yeah. I mean, yeah, I think if he would have put the phone in there and put the very fine setting on, he would have gotten like a little handheld supercomputer, or like a Star Trek like data log or something
for general use. Having collected a wealth of data from more complex objects, Dr. Gears was eager to move to the next stage: live test subjects.
Ooh, okay.
While his fellow researchers had some reservations, the experiments pushed on.
Bro, they're gonna put this mouse in there, turn it on to very fine, and he's gonna come out like Mighty Mouse. Oh man. I don't know why I just referenced Mighty Mouse. Nobody remembers Mighty Mouse, and the people that do remember Mighty Mouse are probably of a certain age. Oh, you kids don't know what you're missing out on with Mighty Mouse.
Beginning with mice. A single white mouse was put into the intake booth on the 1-to-1 setting, and the machine was activated. The result 5 minutes later was an almost identical creature, save for the fact that it now had brown fur. Encouraged by the fact that the mouse survived the refinery process, Dr. Gears next applied for the use of 2 chimps in his SCP-914.
Oh boy. This is gonna get ugly, isn't it? Horse is gonna just leave a pile of organs. Ruff is just gonna have an eviscerated body. But let's see what Fine and Very Fine does.
Experiments. The first chimp was run through the machine on the Fine setting. The result was a chimp of human-level intelligence, who has since begun working for the Foundation under the alias Dr. Bobo. And the data from this test has been expunged from the official reports to protect Dr. Bobo's privacy. The second primate test, this time on Ruff, was not quite as positive. The chimp was dismembered, with the mutilated corpse showing evidence of cutting from high heat and crushing.
Yeah, okay.
Of course,
that's what I thought.
Everyone knew where these tests were eventually going. Dr. Gears requested 2 members of D-Class personnel for testing. The first was a 42-year-old Caucasian male weighing 108 kilograms and standing 185 centimeters tall. Dr. Gears ran him through SCP-914 on the 1-to-1 setting, resulting in a slightly taller Hispanic man with a slightly lower body weight. He immediately became severely confused and agitated, and attempted to attack the guards present, leading to his unfortunate termination by Foundation staff.
Man, it always gets me the way they just throw away these D-Class personnel. Like, they literally were like, yeah, let's throw them into a machine and see what happens. Like, oh man.
It was on the final live test that tragedy truly struck. A 28-year-old Caucasian male was run through the machine on the highly anomalous Very Fine setting. The result was an utterly nightmarish creature. So horrifying that the majority of the details on its physical appearance have been expunged from the report. The creature made a sudden escape, breaching the relatively minor containment procedures intended for the inert SCP-914. This highly dangerous creature killed 8 guards, as well as 2 senior researchers upon emerging from the output booth. A special response team was dispatched to take...
Whoa, okay. Did not expect that. Although, I suppose, if you sit down and think about it, like, in a lot of sci-fi stuff, you've got, like, in StarCraft, you've got the Zerg, in Warhammer, you've got the Tyranids, and these bug-like creatures that seem very violent are, to many, considered to be, like, the apex of evolution. So if that is the case, in the Very Fine setting basically improves things to their natural limit or beyond them, then to take a biological creature, put it through on the Very Fine setting, then you might end up with something like a Zerg or a Tyranid that's just a monster that just eviscerates everything around it. Man, originally I was thinking he was just gonna come out all buff and feeling good, or like they'd make some kind of like superhero out of it, but nope. Nope. Tyranids instead. Surprise, Tyranids inside.
The creature down, but that proved harder than expected. SCP-914 had massively improved upon the human original, especially when it came to its killing ability. Eventually, it was captured, but the Special Response Team suffered injuries and memory loss as a result of the creature's anomalous powers. The creature was also severely wounded, and its blood caused
Memory loss caused by the creature too. So not only could it physically overpower them, but it could mentally mess with their faculties as well. All right.
corrosive damage to the plumbing in Facility 23. The creature expired from its injuries several hours later, turning into a cloud of blue ash that blinded a nearby research team. Dr. Gears would later comment that the experiments were ultimately still a success, in spite of some minor hiccups. Testing on the device continues to this day in an effort to understand the full potential of the machine. Though, for obvious reasons, biological testing on the machine has since been forbidden, without direct authorization from O5 Command. After all, if an already dangerous SCP was ever subjected to the very fine transformation setting, we could be dealing with something beyond our greatest nightmares. Check out SCP-5.
Oh man, okay. So the Clockworks. The Clockworks is a pretty interesting one. There's a lot of potential for that. I would almost like to see a video that was nothing but clockwork tests. You know? And like, man, the potential to run other SCPs through the Clockworks, even if they were SCPs that were inanimate objects, like the butler's handbell, right? Like we took a look at the butler's handbell in a different video, and that's a small inanimate object. If you were to put the butler's handbell through, would it come out as something else? Would it still be a handbell? Or would it change into a Meeseeks box? Or would it change what the handbell summons? Oh man, so many questions. That's why I like these SCP videos, because you watch it and you start thinking about it, and then your mind goes, okay, you know, what is this SCP capable of? How were they going to contain it? And then you start thinking of, well, how would this SCP react with this other SCP? Would it be affected by this SCP? It's crazy. It's crazy. Look what y'all doing to me with these SCPs. All right. Anyways, the Clockworks, that was a cool one. Yeah. I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, please like and subscribe. Also, comment down below. Let me know what your favorite SCPs are. Let me know what SCP you want me to take a look at next. Or if there's any other type of video you want me to take a look at, any type of game or movie trailers or gameplay or anything like that, go ahead and leave it down below, and I will get to it if I can. That being said, thanks for stopping by, guys. Thanks for hanging out. Take care of yourselves, and I will catch you next time.